Welcome to the Skynotes for June, from the 12th of June to the 10th of July. And I thought I'd start by showing this picture I took 10 years ago of noctilucent clouds. Now these are clouds made out of ice crystals which are incredibly high in the atmosphere. They're above the lowest level of the ionosphere at an altitude of around 75 to 85 kilometers. And this time of year it's an ideal time to see them because even at midnight the sun isn't very far below the horizon, and although other clouds are in darkness, these clouds are so high up that they're the only ones that are lit up and you can see. So we've had some fantastic clear skies during lockdown, so I hope you get out and manage to see some of these. The other thing that the fine weather's allowed us to see is the planet Mercury, and this picture I took on the 24th of May shows the moon on the left, Mercury in the middle and Venus on the right. And if you'd never seen Mercury before, then it was helped on the 22nd of May when it got very close to Venus, and this picture I took through a telephoto lens shows Mercury on the left, and on the right you can see Venus and its crescent phase. So I do hope that you manage to see Mercury because it's not often visible in the night sky, and of course its proximity to the sun means that when it does appear it's always difficult to locate. Like Venus, Mercury shows phases, and in this fantastic picture that Jeffrey sent me, you can see that Mercury is showing a slight gibbous phase. That's between half Mercury and a full Mercury. And he also sent me this picture he took on the same day of Venus, and you can see, even using the same equipment, how much larger Venus appears than Mercury. And this was only a few days before Venus went in front of the Sun on June the 3rd to appear in the morning sky. And this is the situation at the end of this month on the 10th of July in the early morning. So if you look east, you'll find that by then Venus will have gone into the Hyades cluster as shown on the left, and also in the morning sky you can see that there are other planets there like Uranus, Mars and Neptune. Then on June the 19th we have a rare event happening, and that is the occultation of Venus. Now this is where the moon goes in front of the planet Venus, and normally this would be a really spectacular thing to see, but there's one problem, and if you look at the time it starts, this is in the morning in daylight, and to make matters even worse, Venus at the time is only about 20 degrees to the sun. So if you hold your hand out in front of you and spread the fingers out, then your hand span covers about the distance between the Sun and Venus. So you can see it's going to be incredibly close. And so if you do try and observe this, and Venus is visible during daylight, I would strongly recommend that you take precautions so you can't possibly see the sun by standing behind a building or some other thing, because if you try and find Venus by waving your binoculars around, then inevitably you're going to look at the sun and blind yourself. So please take every precaution to avoid that situation. Returning now to the morning sky, if instead of looking east you look south, then you'll notice on the left, on the 13th of June, Mars is very close to Neptune. So if you haven't seen Neptune before, then this might be an opportunity to try and locate it. And then if you haven't seen Mars before, it just so happens that the moon is very close to Mars as well. And over the past few months, Mars is gradually becoming brighter as it gets towards opposition at the end of this year. And so it really is an object that stands out, and it's very identifiable by its red colour. And then on the right, towards the south, you've got both the planets Jupiter and Saturn, and they're coming to opposition next month, and normally this would be a good time to observe them, except for the fact that unfortunately they're very low down. And so looking through a telescope, I always find is like looking through a jelly at them. So it's a bit unfortunate that they're always a magnificent sight in any size of telescope. It's just unfortunate they're so unfavourably placed this year. I did think twice this month about mentioning comets again, but I thought I had to include Comet Lemon. Now I'm hoping that the answer's a lemon after we had the disasters of Comet Atlas and Comet Swan, which didn't live up to the hype. Comet Lemon isn't expected to become all that bright, but it should get to naked eye visibility at magnitude 5.5, and we should be able to see it after it passes through perihelion on the 18th of June. But once again, it's not particularly very well placed. It will be low down in the northwest just after sunset. So I haven't got great expectations over this comet, but you never know. As we've found, comets are very unpredictable, and it might suddenly brighten. Moving now away from the planets towards the moon, Geoffrey sent me this picture of the crater Clavius, which is always a great thing to look at with all the little craterlets in its floor. And if you remember, this was where they built the moon base on the film 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I don't know if you saw the Crew Dragon spacecraft dock with the International Space Station the other day, but the interior of that is very reminiscent of the interiors of the sets they used on 2001. So I'm sure that Elon Musk got his inspiration from that film. Another interesting crater is this crater Gazendi, because of the features on its floor. You've got the central mountain peaks, little craterlets, but it's also full of these rills or channels which are produced in the main part by slumping of the moon's surface between parallel fault lines. There are some rills on the moon which are the remains of volcanic flows, lava tunnels, but that's not the case with this crater. And like all features on the moon, it's best observed when it's near the terminator, and in this case that's around 3 days before full moon. And you can see in this picture the full moon where the crater lies. It's just on the northern edge of Mare Humorum. Now the moon gets involved in another event on the 21st of June, and that's an annular eclipse of the sun. But as you can see from this diagram, which shows you where you can see the eclipse, the red line is the center line, and that's where you'll see the moon not quite cover the sun but leave a ring or annulus around it. And then the blue lines show you the areas where you can see a partial eclipse, and unfortunately you won't be able to see any of it at all. And of course travel these days is difficult, so you probably won't be able to travel to see it either. Now if you remember, eclipses normally come in pairs, so you've normally got an eclipse of the sun and an eclipse of the moon separated by 2 weeks. Well, this year we've actually got 3 eclipses separated by 2 weeks. We had the eclipse of the moon on the 5th of June, then eclipse of the sun on the 21st of June, and on the 5th of July we have another eclipse of the moon. And unfortunately this is just like the last one, where the moon was in eclipse as it rose. Well, in this case the moon starts the eclipse just before it sets, and as it's a penumbra eclipse, I expect we won't be able to tell that anything's happened at all. And as all this happens in the early hours of the morning, I'm not inclined to get up to see it either. I don't know what's happened on the sun, but suddenly it decided to wake up from its long slumber, and for the first time in, I think it's about 3 years, we had some really powerful X-ray flares on the 29th of May, and 2 of these were actually M-class flares. So I was very pleased that I could actually observe something at radio wavelengths, because as you know I always look at the state of the ionosphere, and these 2 M-class flares really disrupted it, so things are looking up. And talking of looking up, if you look at the sun you'll find that there's a sunspot has appeared, and it rotated into view at the beginning of June, and it's gradually developing, so I'm hoping that eventually this might produce some more flares that we can see. We're going to be seeing more of the sun over the coming month, as on June the 20th we go through the summer solstice, and as I'm sure you all know, this is where the Earth is in that part of its orbit where the North Pole is pointing towards the sun. And it's always surprising to me that you think, oh, it's getting warmer in summer, we must be closest to the sun, because as you know the Earth goes in an elliptical orbit around the sun. But that's not the case at all. In fact, it's exactly the opposite, because on July the 4th the Earth goes through aphelion, which is its furthest point away from the sun, and in fact it's closest at the beginning of January. I'll finish by looking at the constellations of the month, and I'll start with Boötes. And although sky is very light at this time of year, it's easy to find because it contains the brightest star in the northern hemisphere, and that's the red giant Arcturus. To its east you'll find the semicircle of the northern crown, Corona Borealis, and to the east of there we arrive at the keystone asterism of Hercules. Alpha Herculis is an interesting star. It's a multiple system, and the components we can see are a red giant and a fainter yellow star. And the red giant is a semi-regular variable, which doesn't vary much in brightness, but it's an interesting star to observe nevertheless. Of course the most famous object lies in the keystone, and that's M13, which is a globular cluster. Now globular clusters are collections of ancient stars, and they separately orbit the Milky Way and other galaxies. Hercules also contains another bright globular cluster, and that's M92. Although not as bright as M13, nevertheless it's still a spectacular object to observe in a binoculars or a telescope. With that I'll finish these sky notes, and hopefully I'll see you sometime, either through Zoom or in person. And until then, dark skies.